Hot stove season is well underway, and our friend Niren is here to talk about all the things that he sees when he's combing fan graphs and how this Cubs team could maximize some of these prospects and whether you should hold them or whether you should fold them, just like Kenny Rogers used to talk about. We're going to get into that right now on the Cubs Baseball channel. Like, subscribe, thumbs up. Let's talk some Cubs. All right, there he is, Niren Desai. He is the master of the comments section, and I respect you, man. I love when you put those comments in there, and I read them. I was like, man, this guy makes me think. So then I'm like, hey, why not jump on and let's do like a live mailbag show, really more just like a conversation about the Cubs. So without any further ado, let's talk about what's going on right now with this team. And we were kind of riffing back and forth on prospects. But your thoughts on the Mervis trade and then Alexander Canario, and when should the Cubs move these guys and how long to hold on to them before you make a move?
I think that's a big issue. You know, Mick, I was clicking around Fangraphs, going through the 40-man roster, looking at the top prospect list that they put out, seeing some of their ratings. And the big thing is, it's, you know, like it's getting crowded. That roster's getting crowded. Where are we going to put all these guys? And I do worry after the Mervis trade, if we hold on to guys too long, are we really going to maximize their value, right? We can't think about 2027, 2028, 2029. We got to think about winning and getting in October this year. And I wonder what's going through Jed in the front office mind on how, you know, we maximize their value either by using them or playing them at the major league level or getting a return on them for players that can help us right now.
Well, and then I think that's a great question because they didn't get much for Mervis, you know, and the way that you do things now where you push people up through the system, you don't really know when they're never there long enough to really find out what they do when they struggle. And then you get to the big leagues and you struggle for the first time. And then all of a sudden it's a confidence issue. And I think that's one of the reasons that he failed. And I'm curious to see what he ends up doing in Miami. There's a lot less pressure there than there is with the Cubs. But Michael Busch was traded for. He got into the position. He did a lot better than Mervis. He won the job. I thought Mervis got enough opportunity in the big leagues. But the way that they pushed him up through, you know, that's the way you do it now. But it definitely hurt him. And then you were talking about Alexander Canario. I don't know what they're going to do there. They've got like too many outfielders. He's out of options. You can't trade him, I don't think, because I don't think there's a lot of value for him. He kind of feels like one of these guys that you either include in a trade before that as a throw-in or like right before the start of camp, out he goes if there's no spot available.
Well, there's a lot of guys that he kind of profiles against, right? Like, you know, we actually had Nelson Velasquez, but there's a lot of good players that become great players or decent players, but they take their lumps for a couple of years in the majors. So I just think Canario is going to fall into that camp. Now, I think they may look at maybe using him as a fifth outfielder for platoons in case we need a pinch hitter or something like that against when PCA comes up versus a tough lefty. He can play center for a few innings. It's a big downgrade in center. But I think, and then, you know, if there's an injury or something like that to, you know, Tucker, obviously we don't want that happening. You know, obviously there's an opportunity there as a kind of a depth piece that can bounce back and forth from Iowa. But yeah, I mean, I just think that he's got some raw power. And I think if he was on a certain team or a team that's rebuilding or a team that's pretty top heavy, he could come in and, you know, put in some crooked numbers for them and bat seventh or eighth. But I don't think the Cubs can afford it because we're clogged at seventh, eighth, and ninth in the lineup. We don't have that luxury. You know, someone's playing right field for us. They got to hit fourth or fifth, or, you know, there's no spot for them. So that's a big issue. And I think that's something I think that the front office really has to really think about is how do we maximize, how do we get some value before we bury these guys and then they start to lose value? Because the question will be like, well, if they're so great, why are they still in Iowa?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the tough part about being the Cubs, being a big market team. And sometimes we don't feel like they operate like a big market team, but they are, where it's like, hey, we would rather go out and spend money on someone proven because we're worried about losing the PR battle instead of developing the guys that we went out and traded for and drafted and getting them to the big leagues. Theo was the first front office guy that I feel like really had the ability to do that because of his contract and the reputation that he brought in, and also that, Tom allowed them to lose all those games up there. So they were able to take advantage of the fact that they didn't have to win to give Chris Bryant and Javi Baez and those guys opportunities in the big leagues where it wasn't do or die. Pete Crow Armstrong didn't have that chance, right? I mean, think about it. He comes up and all the games that he played in his first year were important, and he didn't do too good, right? And then it came up the next year and struggled. I look at this, that like where we are in the system, the organization, and then where we are with the big league roster. And it's like, sometimes I just scratch my head. Like, we got all these outfielders, and yet the 2 third basemen that we traded them in the same deal, and they don't have another third baseman. Like, hey, isn't there somebody in the outfield that you might want to throw in there and keep your third base prospect? So I there almost feels like there's a little bit of a disconnect from like where the organization is talent wise and where the big league roster is. I mean, what do you think? Is that, as someone that looks at the numbers, does that sound crazy?
I mean, to me, it seems like there's not a lot. We're not as good as other organizations are on the sequencing and like the pipeline planning, right? It's like, okay, we gathered all these decent prospects, we developed them, but we didn't think about how to sequence them out in terms of right-handed positions, the contracts we signed at the major league level. It just didn't seem like it's sequenced right. And I think a lot of that has to do with, injuries, right? Injuries that happened last year, or performance last year. And then some of the accelerated timelines, like I don't think they expected Mo Baller necessarily to, move that quickly, right? Or so some of these other guys are already in AAA. I just think they expected Wicks and Horton already to be pieces. Right. Like last year was a big one. Like Wicks and Horton, if you look at their organizational strategy, Wicks and Horton not throwing 120 innings at the major league level really hurt their plan, because then you got to go get a Boyd, right? And that's $14 million off the payroll, right? And that just changes the whole dynamic a little bit of like your roster planning, because you can't count on these guys, right? And I think they still believe in their talents, but then how many innings can you get out of Horton if he only threw 40 last year? Like there's going to be innings counts and all that stuff, and the maturation of just learning the game at the top level. These prospects, and then like we were talking offline, there's no margin of error this year for Jed, right? He can't get off to a bad start and then come on and be like, oh, we got to stick with our process, and our projections say this, and they're going to even out. I mean, it's going to get ugly fast.
Yeah. Well, let me pull this up here, because you mentioned this too. So this is spring training, but right in the middle of spring training there is the Dodgers in Tokyo, Japan, right? So you're playing the World Series champs in Tokyo, Japan. Think about the flight. Think about all the stuff that goes into these games that count. Yeah. Right? Like it's not just – it's a great showcase for the game, and I love it. Don't get me wrong. But as far as like the disruption to spring training, I mean, you don't have a whole lot of runway to get there, right? And then you get there, and now all of a sudden, you're playing these 2 games that count, and then your regular season starts. You got 4 at the Diamondbacks, which unfortunately, Niren, you know this, we have stunk against the Diamondbacks of late. And then you go to Oakland for some games, and that's in Sacramento. So who knows how we're going to play in Sacramento.
Minor league ballpark.
Yeah, it'll be like spring training again. And then, here's the schedule, right? You got the Padres, you got the Rangers, you got the Dodgers, you got the Padres again, the Diamondbacks, the Dodgers some more. This isn't a hellacious schedule to start with. I mean, you could literally be out of it before April.
Yeah, I was looking through the schedule, and I'm like, oh, I mean, now that the Diamondbacks got Burns, I mean, there's these, obviously the Dodgers might have a little bit of a World Series hangover, but these other teams are going to be ready to play. They're going to be ready to throw a punch for the start of the season, and the Cubs got to be ready. They can't be like, oh, we're going with Gage Workman at third base, on opening day. I mean, last year we had Madrigal opening day at third base, and it's like, are we serious? And remember Hap had that hamstring last year.
Yeah.
And he played hurt for 2-3 weeks, and he was ice cold, and he wasn't right in the first few weeks. And Tyone had that little injury in the beginning. So, the start of the season is going to be no soft landing for this team. So they got to come out. They got to come out ready. They got to come out with a good roster. And that's why I'm kind of hoping for some of these veteran signings, because we got to get through those first 40, 50 games in a good place. So maybe that's when like Shaw and Horton and some of these other younger players, look like they're ready, or they show that they're ready to be major leaguers, and we can slot them in. But we gotta make sure that this roster is ready to go. Like you said, that Japan trip, that's a lot of travel. There's some exhibition games in there. Yeah. All the whole pitching staff will be used because they're not going to be stretched out. So you're not going to get any 7-inning performances probably out of the gate. So those guys got to be ready to go. And I think the schedule just helped that we stay in Arizona the first and stay on the West Coast in the beginning, so it's not a lot of back and forth. But I just think that season's going to creep up quick on these guys, and you're just not seeing the movement from Jed. I'd love to see Jed throw a punch with the bullpen or with some depth moves to really solidify this roster, because I think they got a lot of pieces, and I don't think they fit right now, and they got to fix that going into spring training.
When you look at a roster, right? When you look at and I've always felt like this, just as a former player that played a ton of baseball, broadcasted the games forever. I've seen like thousands of baseball games. When I watch a team play, and I it's so simple. It's the same thing I did when I was a little kid. Like, hey, who's your catcher? Okay, well, is it Wilson Contreras? Oh, good. No, or is it, is it who? Right? And then
eye test.
Right. So then you look at first base. Who's at first? Is it Anthony Rizzo? Oh, yeah. But if it's, Matt Mervis, or some of these guys that they were picking up off the scrap heap a couple years ago, you can go around the diamond and basically look at what you're throwing out there and get a pretty good idea of how your team's going to play, right? So when I look at the Cubs right now, Carson Kelly's obviously an upgraded catcher. I think Miguel Amaya, to me, it has a lot to prove, but we saw, and I've never been I've never been a huge Amaya guy, but I saw something at the end of last year. If he can follow up with what he did last year, but see, there's a question mark. Maybe you have something at catcher, right? Michael Bush, is he going to have a sophomore slump, or is he going to come out and take care of business, right? Nico Horner had surgery in the offseason. Nico's been so consistent, right? Is he even going to be on the team? Well, could trade him. I'm going to guess he's going to be there. I like Nico. Dansby Swanson, to me, is the biggest letdown on the entire roster, because you're paying him to be a star, and he's Jason Hayward Jr. So it's like, he's got to hit like a star. Just because you play defense and run the bases, that's great. But that guy's got to, like you said, we got a whole team of 7 through 9 hitters. He's got to slide up and be a guy. If he can be a guy, when he hits, this team always wins. I don't know if you noticed that, but at the end of last year when they started playing better, he's the one that hit. I'm hoping that he proves us wrong. You mentioned it. Could be Workman, could be Master Boney over at third. Is it going to be Shaw, or they go out and sign someone? Moncada, I don't know. Whatever they do at third, but that is for the umpteenth year in a row since Chris Bryant left, we haven't had a third baseman, right? So then you look in the outfield, Ian Happ, and then I'm guessing it's going to be PCA, and then you go, or Hollywood Pete, as I like to call him, and then you look at right, and then you got Kyle Tucker, and then Seiya Suzuki is your DH, right? And then who knows what the bench is going to look like. I'm hoping that it's some of the young guys getting experience. I still feel like they need something else. I think it's better than last year, but I still feel like they need something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think they need that. They need to bolster that rotation. I would love to be able to know that the other team is like, oh, look, we've got Steele, Imanaga, TBD, and then they got Tyone, Boyd. You want them to feel a little bit of oh, this is going to be a tough series.
So you're not
when they land in Chicago on Thursday night and they got to wake up 6 hours later for a game. You want them to feel like this is going to be annoying.
So you're not looking at Poteet and being like, man, this is a guy that's going to come in here and win a Cy Young.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing with the bullpen, like that's a mental thing too. If you have a couple shutdown guys in the bullpen, it's like, whoa, guys, if we don't score, by the fifth, this game's going to be over,
Yeah.
right? Like that's another thing, that the Cubs have to do, right? Like if they've got Hodge and Brown looking sharp, and then they got a couple, proven guys in eighth and ninth, then you really shorten that game, right? And again, you just shut these teams down, right? Let them shake in their boots in the
Okay,
second.
let me ask you this though. If we go into the season where we are right now, right, where Tyone is your number 3 guy, Boyd is your number 4 guy, Javier Assad and Poteet are your 5 and 6 guy. We don't know about Cade Horton. I'm hoping that he comes back and he could be an ace on this team if he comes back healthy. I don't know how not playing last year is going to affect him, but I'm telling you, the guy, when I saw him, the guy was really special. I hated to see him get hurt. I'm hearing good things about Ben Brown coming back. Jordan Wicks, when he's been healthy, he's been good. So there's some wild cards out there, but I think we all feel like whether it's making a trade with the Mariners or for Castillo, or making a trade with the Twins and getting Lopez or wherever they are, I think we all feel like they need another legitimate starter. And I don't think they're going to pay for Ryan Flaherty. And then I think we all feel like you want one just, sure thing guy to go into this bullpen with the work that they've done already, and maybe 2. Am I speaking out of turn, or do you?
No,
feel
I think that's really where the edge could be gotten. Especially going into that first 50 games. If we could get that, because you don't know how anything's going to shake out, right?
Okay.
Through the season, right? How do you know if Hodges' arm is going to be able to handle 60 appearances? They don't throw 60 games in the minor leagues, right?
And they baby him down there. Although
they give them 2 days off between relief appearances. Everything's sequenced. Who knows? Like it's not the same as the pro game when you got to throw 3 out of 4 days, high intensity, 40,000 fans. It's a totally different ball game. You're playing day games. These guys are still not even used to the routine of the day game, all that stuff. I just think that's a thing you can't predict. But those first 50 games, if we had one more starter and a couple of proven guys that, professionals that know how to get ready for the season and can come in and secure those innings, that I think gives a lot of space for, these younger guys to play. And then also, also for some of these other veteran guys that they might bring in. So then everything's not on these guys. Like I don't even know who's going to bat lead off, right? Like let's say Hap bats lead off. Well, where do you put Shaw? Like you put in Shaw, and then where do you put Horner? Like these guys are all kind of like stacked together in terms of the lineup, and they're all right-handed, and you want lefties to break up the lineup. So that's another issue too, right? I think Tucker, Seiya, Bush, Hap is a solid 4, right? Like middle 4, but it makes sense if you have people around them. I'd like to see a little bit more thunder in there, but there's no spot. There's no spot really to put anybody unless you want to supplant, Nico or find a slugging catcher, which I don't think there is one to get. So I just think there's all those things that the team's got to work through. I think they're waiting on this Roki thing because I know they have some other international signings they want to use that money for. And then I think they're waiting for the rest of the market to come to them because, as we learned last couple of off seasons, the money goes to there's only like a handful of teams that spend big, right? And then the market comes back to the teams because the other teams are like, yeah, we're not in the $300 million range, and it's everybody else, right? So I think you're going to see that, but man, I'm curious to see what Tanner Scott gets. Once he sets the market, then we'll get a sense of what everybody else gets.
I look at this from a business perspective, and I know you look at it from a fan perspective, but if I'm Tom Ricketts, I'm going, okay, these guys signed Jason Hayward and wasted all my money. And then Dansby Swanson, who still has a chance to earn the money, but last year was a colossal bust to me. And that's not personal. I like him. I get it. Some of you guys are Dansby Swanson fans, but you don't pay a guy, $180 million or 177, whatever it is, to be the 8th hitter. Like that's a lot of money. Okay. That's a big chunk when you're paying taxes and you're paying insurance and you're doing this and that. The value of these teams, and I know the Cubs are really valuable, but the ownership makes the money when they sell. I mean, like, and so it's there, but you got to borrow to get it almost, right? Unless you have a TV network that's killing it like the Dodgers. And that's not the case with the Cubs. Their TV network has not made money, and it's a shame because I feel like it could. I feel like it should be $1 billion business, but it's not. And, I could do a whole show on that. Probably need to be quiet instead of giving you my opinions on that one. But I will say this, that it feels like to me that ownership is handcuffing these guys enough where they're saying, hey, you got this. They went and sold Bellinger, and I've talked about this on here. They gave themselves a little bit of money to work with. And you're right. They're going to have to wait for the market to come back, because I think that that if I'm the owner, or if I'm the owner's family, or if I'm the team president on the business side of things, I'm going, the last thing we want is this guy to go out here and put us in another bad contract. And then when we go get a new front office, they're going, oh, I can't believe that we've got this guy signed and this guy signed and they're not producing, right? It makes the job more attractive. Now, with that said, what I hope happens is that Jed wins the World Series and gets signed and we're all happy. But when you're from a fan point, you're like, look, I don't care. I just want them to buy. We're this close.
Well, I'm like, I play both sides of that, right? So from the ownership perspective, Jed's got $100 million more than the next team in the league,
right?
Than the Brewers, right? And that should be enough. I mean, issue $50 million should be enough to beat the Brewers. I mean, we have a bigger, the revenue is way higher. You have all the resources in the world, the payroll, you have more payroll than them. Why aren't we beating the Brewers with 50, 80, $100 million more? That's one. And then you're right. I'm not going to give Jed more money if he can't, hasn't proven it. And ultimately, that's the path, right? That's the path to even getting a 2 seed, because the NL East is going to beat up on each other too. If you dominate the Central, you can get a 2 seed, where it's going to be a lot harder for, these other teams to get a 2 seed than from the Central. So I think that's one. And then you just don't know about, if money was, I think if Ricketts knew that he was a guarantee by spending money, he would spend the money, because they would just make the money back, right? Because it's a guarantee.
Right.
You'd make the money back in ticket sales and jerseys and subscriptions and all this stuff. But I don't think it's a guarantee. The guarantee is talent. Like the best roster that plays the right ball is going to be, the most talent's going to win, right? And then that's what the Cubs are lacking right now. So I think that's the big thing, that you can't, it's just like a house, right? Like you can't say, oh, because the Cubs are worth, your house is only worth until you sell it, right? Until you walk away with that, with that stack of cash, that's the thing. So I don't think they're cheap. I just think they're not going to let Jed overspend, because he hasn't proven he can beat the Brewers with the money he's already been given.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair thing to do from an ownership perspective.
Yeah.
But I think the next guy they get, he's going to want, like, I'm not coming to Chicago with World Series expectations unless we are willing to go 260, 270, 280, 300 when the time's right. I don't think that next guy's going to come in and be like Jed and be like, oh, I'm going to spend intelligently. I don't think that's going to work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's been one of the criticisms from people too, that they say that these guys behind the scenes are, basically the GMs, the Theos and the Jed Hoyers and those guys feel like the Cubs are cheap, like they should spend more money. But when I look at the graphics, and I see that the Cubs, for the amount of money they spend, are not getting the return. It's like you said, it's like you look at the amount of money put out and the results and the wins that came back, and it just doesn't match. So we'll find out, but it's an interesting conversation for where we are right now, because I still feel like there's some more big moves coming. And I think that if I'm Jed Hoyer, I know that this is it. Like, this is my last shot to be the boss, or I'm just going to be Robin for the rest of my life and somebody else is going to be Batman, right? So the bottom line is this, is if you want to be Robin, lose this season. But if you want to take that Batman mask on and run Gotham, you better win now. And I felt like that Kyle Tucker move was kind of pushed in that direction. And I feel like there's got to be a couple more moves to get closer to it, because there's some question. I mean, this team could win, but I don't know. This was a team that went, 15 games last year and didn't score any runs. How many times did they score 1 run, 2 runs? They would have good games and then they would just be totally dead. they were so Jekyll and Hyde. And when you look at how close they got at 83 and 79, you know, a few more of those games, you score some runs and you win, and all of a sudden you're in the playoffs and you're not in a spot right now where the whole front office is, you know, is going to get fired. And then on top of that, Cubs fans just want a winner.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think of the front office, right? Their team, they've got a master plan. They're sitting in their conference rooms and they're dreaming on players and their projections. But think about, I just think that they got to be wondering, you don't want to be out of work or out of a job or, you know, in totally disparate positions across the league in 2026 and say, you know what, if we had just traded our 2027 and 2028 projections on James Triantos and Jackson Wiggins and you know, Jefferson Rojas, we'd all still be together. You know, like,
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. You have to look at it from their own perspective of self-preservation, right? They all want that extension. I think they got to make a couple moves. It doesn't have to happen before opening day. It'd be better if it was, but they gotta really lean into finding an edge with this roster so they win this division, like really running away, you know, like not squeaking in, not, oh, we, you know, made a bunch of trades at the deadline. Like they got to win this division, get that extension, see their master plan through. They can replace these guys. A good organization replaces players. I don't want, I mean, this is a really in the weeds. The Brewers took Cooper Pratt in the 6th round last year in the 2023 draft. He's a top 100 prospect. He was rated high. He slipped and they paid him the bonus. To, you know, I don't understand why the Cubs didn't do that. They had the pick in the 5th round. They didn't have a relationship with him as a player to make that deal, make that signing, right? The Brewers did. So you can replace Cam Smith in the 5th round if you scout the right guy, build a relationship with him, and say, hey, we'll give you a bonus to skip college. You know, and that's been that all the good teams do that, right? Mm-hmm. So they can't be scared of trading away these guys because they're irreplaceable. Because honestly, Gunnar Henderson, Bobby Witt, Corbin Carroll, those guys are not replaceable. These other guys are. We don't have a prospect that's like, oh, he's irreplaceable.
Yeah. Great conversation. You guys jump in, get in the comments section on the Cubs baseball channel. Always love to read that. Like, subscribe, share with your Cubs friends. Thank you for making this channel a lot of fun to hang out with. Niren, always great to see you. And we'll be back tomorrow unless something breaks. Maybe the Cubs make this giant move. Add a third baseman and a starter and a closer all today. Thanks, guys, and go Cubs.